This is Dolynny TV, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning and welcome back. Oh yes, another edition of Edmonton Oilers discussion here on the channel this morning. And what is there not to discuss? My goodness, what a night of news, a roller coaster. The deal is tentatively in place is the key term, but here we find ourselves potentially, according to wherever you follow social media, 25 days away from the NHL season starting up. And how does that feel, right? Obviously, yeah, I talked about this being a crappy month. We got to get through Christmas, New Year's. But by the time we get through New Year's, suddenly training camps open. Suddenly then it's a mad dash because, every day Bob Stauffer will be putting out new lines. Jack Michaels will chime in every third day with his line pairings. Dave Tippett will be talking to the media every second day. And away we friggin' go, right? And now we get news that, for all intents and purposes, Evan Bouchard, Tyler Benson, and Ryan McLeod have made the Edmonton Oilers prior to training camp even kicking off. Why? Let's get to it. This taxi squad stuff is very, very interesting. So, here we go. Let's read this. A quote from part of the article from the Sportsnet staff article about the 56-game season. The article that we were referencing last night that had the Elliot Friedman tweet in it that announced the season getting ready to go for January 13th, 56 games. In addition to the scheduling decisions, the agreement features at least 3 roster-related elements as well. Friedman reported that there will be no proration of salaries. Teams will have a 23-man roster plus a 4 to 6 player taxi squad, and teams will have the option to toll the contract year of a player who opts out of the season, meaning it's up to the team to decide whether that player still owes them that year or not. So for the Flames and Oilers, talk about guys potentially opting out. Well, if a James Neal or a Milan Lucic opted out, Ken Holland and Brad Treliving definitely wouldn't say, hey, you still owe me that year. No way, because why would you keep that extra year on the books? That's just an instance of how that would play out in terms of saying, no, I'm not keeping that contract year on the books. Now, obviously, say a Connor McDavid opted out, heck yeah, you're going to keep that contract on the books, right? Bingo. That's the other vice versa way of it. So, I won't get into the salary stuff quite yet because that kind of complicates the argument I'm about to make here before we actually make the argument kind of deal, because we have to talk essentially this taxi squad math, right? 23 guys, that's your main roster. That's unchanged from the year previous. This isn't 26-man roster like we thought it was going to be. Instead, it's a bigger taxi squad roster. Essentially, the way taxi squads will work, quoting Chris Johnston of Sportsnet right now, for all intents and purposes, is those players are considered to be in the AHL. That is, if they're players who would normally need waivers. If they're players that normally need waivers, you're going to need to clear waivers to be sent to the taxi squad. That's where I'm making some arguments here. But the taxi squad will be with the NHL team. They'll travel with the team. Those players will receive NHL benefits like per diem and the like, but they can be called up at a moment's notice and put into a game. So there's no waiting for them to get here, quarantine, anything like that. They're there. They're ready to go. Put them in the game as soon as you need them kind of deal. So that is why I'm not talking about the salaries and the minor league salaries and stuff like that quite yet, because what it means to need to clear waivers is if you're on a one-way contract going down to the AHL, you need to clear waivers. That's the way the NHL works. Well, suddenly that finds the Oilers in a weird situation. You've got Joakim Nygard on a one-way contract. You've got Gaetan Oss on a one-way contract. Tyler Ennis, Jujhar Khaira, Alex Chiasson, Josh Archibald, all on one-way contracts. And those are all guys that kind of find themselves in weird spots on the roster, where if there was a 26-man roster, no problem, they would have found themselves on that 26-man roster. We're not even talking about losing them on waivers. But on a 23-man roster, in which the Edmonton Oilers technically have already 6 defensemen signed, right? Because Clefbaum's not fully activated to the LTIR yet, and I mean that'll remain, and then Bear will get going, and we're good to go. You've got your squad. You've got 15 forwards, 6 defensemen, 2 goalies, bing bang boom. You're fine and dandy. But you're going to want to carry probably 7 defensemen on the active squad, right? So all of a sudden there you need to trim a forward. And there was talk last night about throwing Kyler Yamamoto on the taxi squad on non-days, and that does make sense to save cap, but if we're using LTIR, apparently that doesn't work. So again, the money side of this, I'm not 100% sure on it yet. I need to find a full article that explains how the money affects the roster and how it affects the taxi squad in the AHL, because now you have 3 layers of hockey, and one is in between the NHL squad and the AHL squad, that being our taxi squad. So here's the fun part, is who do you have on two-way contracts that can be on that taxi squad without risking losing them? Well, Alan Quine is kind of the odd man out in the minors system. He finds himself on a one-way deal. So does Patrick Russell. So those two guys, they were prime taxi squad candidates, right? Guys that can fill a roster spot if needed, but at the same rate, you know what, they can sit there and not be too hurtful against the cap or anything if you've got them on a taxi squad at 750 and 700. Well, okay, great. But now on one-way deals, if you end up calling them up to the main roster for a game and then sending them to the taxi squad and you lose them on waivers, now you got to go get somebody out of the minors. You got to get them quarantined. Oh my goodness. Now we're talking what a disaster, right? And that's kind of going to be the key for the Oilers to avoid, is avoiding those disasters. So now you've got Adam Cracknell, Joe Gambardella, Seth Griffith, Tyler Benson, Ryan McLeod, and Cooper Marody all in there as guys who can be two-way deal players and fit that taxi squad bill. Problem is, do you want them playing on the minor or on the taxi squad and just practicing? That's where this gets really complicated now. Is yes, okay, realistically, who's going to claim Alan Quine? Maybe a team that has a couple of injuries. Okay, so that's a worst case scenario, and then Tyler Benson, Cooper Marody, Ryan McLeod get their shot then. Well, okay, fine, dandy, okay, whatever. But at the same rate, you've got a guy like Adam Cracknell that could very easily just take that spot. But Alan Quine's a centerman, so right, that's an argument to be made of itself. Patrick Russell, who's going to claim him? Well, I don't know. Who's going to claim Patrick Russell? I don't think anyone else in the league's beating on the door to get Patrick Russell from Ken Holland, so claiming on waivers probably isn't going to go the same way either. But again, you just don't know. So now you've got taxi squad players on the defense. Theodore Lindstrom. Well, no matter where he is, he's good to go. And the entire defense is good to go. Evan Bouchard's good to go. You've got William Lageson's good to go, right? He's two-way this year, one-way next year. So you've got your 3 guys that could easily fill out that taxi squad. They're fine and dandy. Anton Forsberg. Here's one that really gets interesting, and he's kind of an odd man out all of a sudden. On the goaltending side of it, he's on a $700,000 deal. For a team that would need a goalie, a backup goalie, if he's on waivers, you're going to claim him. I would sit there and think, just based on the way this year could possibly play out in a 56-game schedule, Anton Forsberg is a prime candidate to be lost on a one-way deal going to the taxi squad from the NHL roster. So that's where you see now, I believe Dylan Wells has found his way to Edmonton. Stuart Skinner, Dylan Wells, they have an important role to play here, and Stuart Skinner may be getting bumped along a little bit further in his development than most of us would like at 22 years old this season after a struggling year in the minors. But yeah, that's the situation, right? Stuart Skinner finds himself as probably the prime taxi squad goalie, and that's behind Mike Smith and Mikko Koskinen. So there's several kind of situations you can play out here, but kind of from my idea of it to work against the MLB idea of it. The MLB idea, they had guys that were actual pro players, like a Caleb Joseph that had played a lot of MLB seasons, but I guess the way you're going to see your taxi squad go is for maximum safety, you have to maximize using two-way deals to avoid the obvious, right, waivers. And the last thing you can afford is try send someone to the taxi squad, have them get claimed, and away they go. But at the same rate, if you're willing to risk it, i.e. to get rid of someone, big whoop, guess what? You get rid of them, and then you have only 5 players on your taxi squad. Well, actually, yeah, I guess 5 because 1 went to the main roster. You know what? You're still doing pretty okay. And that's where this really gets complicated for the Oilers is yes, you have the ability 100% to use your rookies, to use and maximize those two-way contracts. Won't really matter maximizing cap space with it because, of course, you've got the implications of the LTIR. But when it comes down to it, you can look at it this way that, you know what, we can get our young guys into the lineup. Kyler Yamamoto, he's an interesting part, and obviously we don't have anyone else on a two-way deal in the NHL. But at the same rate, if you're willing to risk losing a Joakim Nygard or a Gaetan Oss, you can put one of those Ryan McLeod guys or a Tyler Benson into the lineup for one game. But again, what we'll talk about in mere moments here a little bit later today on Dolynny TV, I'm going to do the video in mere moments, and then we'll talk about it in about an hour when I upload it, but is the roster implication that, yes, we can maximize these two-way contracts, no problem. At some point, we still have to, before the season gets underway, with these new rules defined, we have to trade 1 or 2 of our NHL contracts on the forward core. Simply because, right, is if you need to make a move to get a rookie into the lineup, you're going to have to send someone down, and guess what? We do not have the luxury of a bunch of two-way contracts. And Nygard, I imagine there are plenty of teams that would like to take a flyer on Joakim Nygard for $875. That's just my feeling. Gaetan Oss, right-hand, fourth-line centerman, pretty valuable piece in the NHL, can kill penalties as well, and of course we need him, so we need to find him a role. Josh Archibald, again, same thing. If you end up putting him on waivers, he's gone, even at $1.5 million. So there's a lot to be gone that you need to figure out between now and January 13th if this roster math of a 4 to 6 man taxi squad holds up. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll get to it in an hour or two's time from now, and we'll get discussing kind of why this means we need to get a trade. I already explained a little bit, but we'll get into the nitty gritty in a couple hours. I'm Tyson, this is Dolynny TV. I'm up on out of here.